Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bear Down Ballers. I'm Ryan Wall, joined as always by Jordan Pollock. And Jordan, the Arizona Wildcats have won two straight games since we last spoke. They're 16-6 right now. They're tied for first in the Big 12 with Houston. They have a game coming up with them in a few weeks. But Arizona this past Saturday beat ASU for the ninth time of their last 10 meetings. Crazy to believe that. Arizona has won 12 of the last 13 games, five in a row since they lost to Texas Tech a couple weeks ago. They are really just on fire, and everything seems to be going right. First off, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. It's we're getting closer to March Madness. We got kind of the NBA trade deadlines going on right now, so it just feels like we're like fully ingrained into basketball, and I'm loving it.
Yeah, well, give me your first thoughts and takeaways from this game because you were actually can give us some sounds and sights because you were actually boots on the ground in
Yep.
Tempe, Arizona for this game this past Saturday.
Yeah, man. I think me and my dad, I brought him with to the game with me, and we are kind of just trying to judge the crowd, and it was kind of like 65-35 Arizona to ASU fans, which I feel like is pretty probably average at that game in Tempe, but still a lot of Arizona fans. It was back and forth pretty much throughout the whole game, which is kind of what I expected until the last like 4 minutes when Arizona got that little bit of lead towards the end, and then all of the semantics and controversial stuff happened with the headbutt and the technical and the double technical, which again, really odd that Caleb Love gets thrown out of a game for being mad that he got headbutted, but that's neither here nor there. And they pulled out, and they actually completely made me right on guessing it at a 9 point spread. So that was kind of funny, but it was a great environment. ASU, like, they threw some good punches. They hit a lot of like heavily contested threes. I thought they were really good in transition at times, and I think they exposed, I think, some of Arizona's defensive transition weaknesses. But I think the biggest thing for me from the game was just how dominant Arizona was on the offensive rebounds and even just the front court. Like, Vesar and Owaka just continue to impress, and I remember a lot more of Vesar's plays from that game. But even last night against BYU, like, both of those guys have been just absolutely fantastic going forward. And the main guy that is the face of this team, Caleb Love, has been on an absolute tear. He's played very efficiently. He's shown up in every single game. He's hit big shots. He's even defended, I think, at an extreme rate that I don't know if we've ever really seen with him. And it seems like that's kind of feeding everybody defensively.
Yeah, there's so much to touch on this game, but yeah, like you said, Arizona State did put up a great fight. BJ Friedman had 19 points, four three-pointers. That guy, so many big time shots. He also had a technical, and the first technical of this game, there were so many in this one. The first technical in this game was actually by Jaden Bradley, and I thought this was a horrendous call. And I actually think when there's
Well, didn't
calls,
Bobby, didn't Hurley get the first one?
oh,
I think
I thought it was Bradley.
I think
Was it?
Hurley
Was
got
it?
the first
All
one,
right.
and then Bradley like looked at him like
Yeah.
a few
So
minutes later after a bucket.
so Hurley got the first one. He took off his tie. He was
Yep, yep,
screaming, obviously, and that was like a couple minutes into the game. And it's like
yep,
when you're taking off your tie that early, it's just that. I mean, that guy is just. There's a couple of the coaches out there in America, but he's one of those guys. He's unbelievable on the sidelines to watch, that's for
yep.
sure. But yeah, the Jaden Bradley had a very clean finish at the rim, and then he's running back and he's kind of just staring at Arizona State's bench, mean mugging them kind of, and yeah, kind of instigating them. But I don't know. To me, especially in a rivalry game, you can't be giving technicals for something like that because then when we get later on in the game, like that play when Caleb Love got headbutted, I know Caleb Love, he does like to talk his trash throughout the game, so he's not off, scot free. But when you have something like that, it's really, to me, it should the game, or the refs just didn't have a great control of that game when it got into that second half. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And even afterwards, the fact that Coach Hurley was almost complaining of like, oh, the Arizona bench was talking to our guys the entire time. It's like it's a rivalry to think that one side is talking and the other side isn't, especially when it's in your gym. I think that's one of the biggest things that just blew my mind throughout the entire game and like everything that was going on. It was like, oh, like they're doing this and this and this. It's like it's your arena. Your fans have the capacity in this place, and you're blaming the bench or the other team for talking. It's like, and you're not responsible for any of it in your house. And so that was just one of the things that blew my mind completely of like, oh, they just did this and this and this and they're doing this and I'm not gonna vote for this guy because I have an all conference. It's just so whiner baby to me. Like it
And
was
Jordan, and also along that point in your own arena at the end when he kind of pulled his team off like right as the buzzer and just kind of like waved like to Tommy and just like looked over and just did it and then just like immediately left. Like who does that on their own? Like normally that
I'm saying.
that's the team. Like you don't do that on your own arena. That's just like you're going into like if they went into Macau and these things didn't go their way, they bounce early. You don't bounce early at your own place. I even know you're getting beat. It's
I felt the exact same way. Like immediately, I was recording videos. I'm like, "How are you letting us do this to you? And like, why are you doing this in your own arena? You're leaving before the clock is at zero in your own arena, going to your own locker room. Like, it's just something I've never seen before. Like, it was wild.
yeah, Jordan. Aside from that, getting more into the game and a couple of things that stood out to me. One of pro probably the best, maybe the best play of the whole season. One of in the last couple of years, just one of the most exciting plays that I can't get out of my head. It was in the first half. Caleb Love was on the left side, sees KJ Lewis cutting to the middle, throws him up a lob dunk. I mean, that was just the highlight that will go down in the history books, especially in this rivalry's history books for a long time. It was that special. The guys were hyped up, kind of had a chest bump. I mean, that play was just spectacular.
Yep. To refresh a little bit, it was close to the start of the second half because it was right in front of the ASU student section. I
My
think it was probably
apologies.
like 3 or 4 minutes into the
Yeah.
second half. But yeah, that was a great play, and it was right in front of us. It was awesome to see, and they bumped up the intensity and the defensive pressure. They went full court for a little bit, and I love that I've seen that too. And I thought it was a little questionable because Carter Bryant, I know Henry Vasar, and a few other guys they had some pretty early fouls. And so putting Carter Bryant at the top of a full court press with three fouls, with basically almost the entire second half to go, I thought was a little risky, and they got a lot of great turnovers, and they had that highlight play out of that. So I thought it was an awesome change of pace for Tommy defensively, and Tommy's just done such an amazing job starting 4-5 into the season and on a 12-1 run since then
Yep.
through conference play has just been nothing short of remarkable for this team and how he's gotten the best out of this roster.
Yeah, it seems like each step and test Tommy and kind of thing he needs to overcome, he just passes it with flying colors, continues to
Yep.
prove that. But Jordan, that you mentioned the rebounding, which was fantastic. I want to get into that in a minute. Out rebound ASU 52 to 38. Unbelievable. Arizona in this game had five players with six or more rebounds. Carter Bryant actually led the team with 10 rebounds. KJ Lewis had eight. But the thing that stood out to me the most, the number one thing and reason why I think Arizona won this game, believe it or not, is free throw shooting. They were
Yep.
21 for 22 from the line. This is the best they've shot the ball from the line all season long. We've harped on this throughout the whole season. They've been very inconsistent. They've shot in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and now all the way up to 95.5%. Only missed one foul shot, and KJ Lewis, Caleb Love, and Bradley all led the way from the line. All were 6 for 6 from the free throw line. That is what you need when you're going into a hostile environment, when you're going to enemy territory. going into Tempe, and that's just what you want to see from your veterans and from your team leaders.
Yeah, completely agree. And especially, and I've been talking about this a little bit with my dad recently because right now, like who Arizona played early in the season, Wisconsin right now is on pace to basically break a team free throw percentage record. And if your entire team can shoot free throws at a high rate, you're you're very hard to beat at the end if you're trailing from them. Like it is nearly impossible to beat a team if you're down late because really the only way you can do that is to foul them to put them at the line, and if they're making them all you have very little chance, so it's super demoralizing. You almost like have to get to a certain spot where you like lead at the end, and so
Yeah.
free throws are such a crucial part of the game.
Yeah, and especially kind of go hand in hand, rebounding and free throws, especially offensive rebounding, like you were mentioning. Arizona out rebounded Arizona State on the offensive end, 18-11. That was a big deal. Henry Visar, 5 offensive rebounds. The guy was just fighting tooth and nail to get every board there in the paint. And when you get those boards, that leads to opportunities, getting fouled at the rim, getting baskets, and yeah, I really, really think that although Arizona did shoot 37% from the field, which is pretty terrible if I do say so myself, as guys like KJ Lewis were 1 for 10, Townsend and Del Orso combined for, I mean, they were 4 for 17 from the field, was just awful. But the thing that continues to kind of be at the forefront with this team is they always figure out ways to win, and that's obviously not always. They did lose by 16 to Texas Tech a couple of weeks ago, but like you just said, 12-1 in the last 13 games, and in these late games, I'm becoming more comfortable and confident in this group that they're going to get the job done. Because earlier in the season, they had multiple games against Power Four teams where they couldn't win. They couldn't make enough plays. They just had too many turnovers and mistakes, and they kind of have cleaned that up. And I'm pretty confident with this team late game situations. What do you think about them in these areas?
Yeah, I completely agree, and it's kind of range too, I think, because like out like the Iowa State game, I think is probably the best game from start to finish. I think I've seen this team play, and they had a few mistakes, but they were super limited, and it was very much pictured in a way of like, especially against that team, like you have to play almost flawless to like have a chance to beat that team, and obviously they were a little short of like perfect because they had to hit a crazy shot to go to overtime. But in a lot of their other games, it feels like that they'll make mistakes early, but they'll always usually correct it and add to it, which has been an awesome thing to see this team continue to grow, and this team is like it's super diverse in their age too. So it's not just like a bunch of seniors like we got some programs around the country. Like it's a mix of freshmen, redshirt sophomores, and that. So it's been cool to see them kind of come together, learn through their mistakes, and continue to succeed through those.
Yeah, overall, this was a fantastic victory for this Arizona program in Tempe, in enemy territory. As I said, great. It's always great to beat the Sun Devils, and the way they did it this time was really good. Hard fought victory till the end. Very tough game. Do you have any final thoughts before we move on this one?
Yeah, I think one thing I'm just going to add on to you're talking about offensive rebounding, and I think one thing that I've noticed lately is especially with Tobe Awaka and Henry Vasar both being great offensive rebounders. I I think from my perspective they do it very differently too. Like Awaka's a guy that's just going to go in there and fight, and he's going to rip the ball out of guys' hands. He's going to jump in a crowd. He's going to be the one coming down with it. But I think Vasar is a little bit more tactical, and he'll kind of just figure out the right spot to be to grab the ball and get an easy
Yeah.
bucket. And that's a super big talent. I know that was a huge thing with Dennis Rodman and Charles Barkley throughout their careers is look in the trajectory of the shot. Okay, if it's a miss, it'll probably hit the backboard in this spot and bounce in this spot. And so that's a talent, and maybe Vasar does that. Maybe he's just kind of lucky in the spots, but I think that's one kind of difference that I've noticed in those two and how they get offensive rebounds, and it's cool to see them both succeeding a lot in their own kind of way.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I think that has to also a big part of that is Vesard is a very he's a taller guy, 7 foot plus guy. He's long and he's pretty skinny, I think, and that helps him kind of maneuver in between certain holes there through the defense. But Jordan, before we get into Arizona's second victory of the week against BYU. And later, we're going to preview their game this Saturday against Texas Tech. Before we get into those things, Arizona finalized an agreement with the Yukon Huskies, the two-time defending national champion Huskies, to play them in a home and home starting next season during the 2025-26 season. It starts on the road at UConn, and then during the 2026-27 season, it moves to the Macau Center for their second game. What do you think about this home and home series that Tommy Lloyd struck with Dan Hurley?
I'm excited, man. I think it's interesting he did it within days of beating his brother in his own core. I think that's an interesting dynamic. And as much as we've been talking about Bobby Hurley, I think there's a lot of similarities between the two brothers and kind of just especially we've seen with Bobby just his antics with the referees and that's been a I know a super polarizing thing for Dan this season with UConn and how much he gets on the refs and how much he rides them. But I'm super excited. I love the fact of how immediate it is. And I know it's a lot different in college football when schools make these arrangements. It's like 10 years in advance. Like I remember talking to my friends about like, oh, Arizona football, they play in Tuscaloosa against Alabama.
Yep, just thought
And I
about that.
and I look on the schedule and it's not for another 5 years. And it was like that deal was made like 3, 4 years ago. So it's like we gotta wait 9 years. Who even knows where the programs are at by then? And so I think making it a little sooner, I think is good because at least you have a little bit better guess of where each program's going to be. Like obviously we're both nationally ranked right now. UConn looks really good in kind of a weaker Big East right now, but they just blew out Marquette in Milwaukee the other day. They still look like they're going to continue to go on a tear and how much he's flipped that program and how great UConn is now and kind of where Tommy Lloyd's been at and how he's slowly been building every year in and out and just they both have been consistent winners. So I think that's still something I expect to see going forward and even into these games. And I think another element that's important is especially this season with both of these coaches taking their programs to the feast week tournaments and how both of them very much underperformed and even Dan Hurley went to the point of talking about how much he hated it and how much he hated playing in
Yep.
a game every single day for like 3, 4 straight days. And Tommy didn't specifically say it, but I think there was some I definitely got the sense that he doesn't like them also. And so I think it's interesting that these two coaches that at least one says and one seems like they're not about the tournament feast formats, that they're actually putting their money where their mouth is. They're putting games on campus one at a time. And I'm in love with the idea. I'm super excited to see these two major brands go at it the next few years.
Yeah, well, I think when you don't play in a Feast Week tournament, you need to put not just one, but you need to have multiple big games on your schedule because it beefs up your non-conference schedule. And also, well, this is a long story, a subject for another day. I still like Feast Week games, Feast Week
Me
tournaments,
too. Me too.
make the
Completely
score,
agree.
make the sport. And to me, that helped Arizona this season. And I think it's going to continue. It'll help Arizona when they get into Big 12 tournament play and March Madness because they have experience playing in a tournament field already. But yeah, this is a no-brainer deal between two of the elite programs in the country and the two-time national champion UConn Huskies. Great. It'll be great to for Arizona to go on the road there, to go out east, somewhere they haven't been in a little bit, new environment. Great win-win for both programs. But Jordan, I want to move on and talk about Arizona's win against BYU. They beat them by 11 points, 85 to 74. When you were talking about what they've done to teams, also they haven't just beat teams since they lost to Texas Tech. They beat them pretty well. They beat Oklahoma State by 14 points. They beat Colorado by 15 points. Then they beat Iowa State. Although they beat them in overtime, they still beat them by 11 points, dominated that overtime period. Arizona State by 11 and BYU by 11. So this team is really rolling. A guy that had a big bounce back performance I wanted to start with in this game was Toby Awaka, who he only made one field goal against ASU, but was 6 for 8 against BYU, 14 points, 9 rebounds. What'd you think about him, and who else caught your eye in this one?
Yeah, I thought, especially in this game, because I have not seen Arizona. I can't remember the last time I've seen Arizona play against a team that was throwing a zone at them, and so that was one thing that I thought was really interesting to see with BYU running a 3-2 zone, and your dead spots are in the paint. And I thought Toby Awaka did a great job hitting shots and was consistently being aggressive, because that's kind of how you destroy those zones. You find the soft spots inside the paint, and you find them on slow rotations for 3 pointers. So I thought he did great.
Yeah.
I was super impressed with their zone offense.
Yeah. And another big thing that was similar to the ASU game to this one is the rebounding battle. Arizona once again won this by a large margin, out rebounded BYU 45 to 30, and they held BYU to under 30% shooting from three-point land. Arizona once again 88% from the free throw line. So a lot of consistency, like we were saying in the last game from Arizona. Three more guys that scored 17 or more for Arizona. Caleb Love had 18, and Bradley and Vasar had 17 apiece. Vasar was excellent with 8 for 10 from the field, 17 and 6 with 2 steals in this one. Who stood out from between those three to you?
Yeah, I just love him so much. I'm still gonna continue to go Vasar. He just continues to, I think, kind of carve out his role super well and continues to play in it super well. I think hitting some threes was also huge for him. He still has stayed consistent and trying to at least get 1 to 2 off a game. And so I've loved that aspect of still trying to keep the defense honest and stretch them out, because that can be a huge barn burner for teams.
Yeah.
And so I just loved how aggressive that he has stayed.
Yeah, 100%. Jaden Bradley mentioned he had 17, and he followed up a 6 for 6 performance from the free throw line with an 8 for 8 game from the line against BYU. So I think that's a really big area that if he continues to add this to his game and makes it a priority for his game moving forward this season, I think that can elevate Arizona because he's just when he gets downhill and gets going, he's so quick and he's been finishing so well at the rim. It really adds that extra layer for Arizona. This was a really good win because just like ASU, this environment in Provo was really just an excellent environment. We thought this was going to be a good environment for Arizona to go into, but I was pretty impressed. What'd you think of it?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's just crazy, the night and day difference between conference games in the Pac-12 to even conference games in the
Yep.
Big 12. So I think it's awesome to see how much they've kind of risen in that too, and how well they've continued to play in these great environments. And they still got a few big ones to go to. They got to go to Ames in a few weeks. They finish off at Allen Fieldhouse in Lawrence, Kansas. So they've still got some tough battles ahead of them, but they've played really well so far.
Yeah, it's crazy to say Arizona is now 10-1 in the Big 12 this season, but their one game that they've lost in conference, luckily they get an opportunity for revenge. This Saturday they play number 13 Texas Tech. It's not on the road this time. It's at the McCall Center. It's a late one on ESPN, 8:30 local time, 10:30 p.m. on the East Coast. It's Arizona, Texas Tech. Arizona now is ranked 20th, so went from being unranked for plenty of weeks. Now they're in the top 20, and if they want to break inside that top 20, they have a great opportunity here. As we know, Texas Tech beat them pretty bad by 16 points. That was a pretty brutal game for Arizona. They shot 16% from three, 31% from the field, and only two guys in double figures. And JT Toppin dominated Arizona 20 and 16 in that one. What do you think needs to change in this game for Arizona to come out with the victory or Saturday night?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing would be, I think looking back on the previous one, was finding a guy to be able to somewhat defend JT Toppin. But as we looked at from last Saturday's game, JT Toppin gets a flagrant two and gets kicked out of the game within the first 4 minutes of the game, and they still have a crazy overtime win against Houston. So it's hard because they're just so good from top to bottom, and it's just kind of blown, I think. I I think I picked them to finish, I think, fourth in the conference, and Grant McCaslin has just done such a great job with this roster. But I think it's going to take a lot. I think the crowd is going to need to get into it pretty early and stay in the game. And I think they're going to have to run guys off the 3 point line, because that was a big factor. I remember in that game was how bad we were at shooting threes, but also how many threes we let them shoot wide open.
Yeah. A big factor in that first game was their three best guards, Darren Williams, Elijah Hawkins, and Chance McMillan. All didn't shoot the ball well from the field, but two of them were 3 for 12. McMillan was 5 for 13. If they can keep those guys contained and kind of get in Toppin's head early and slow him down, I think Arizona is going to win this game. I really do. I think Arizona right now is one of the best teams in the country the last 2 weeks, especially. And this win would really put the cherry on top, would revenge their first loss. I think Arizona is going to win this one by 3 points. I think it's going to be a barn burner down the stretch. Jordan, before we go, what's your prediction?
Yeah, I'd put it at probably a half a point. I think one team's going to win by 1 point. I think it's probably going to be Arizona. I'll go with you on that win prediction, but I think it'll be a single point. I think it's going to come down to the very end of the game.
Yeah, well, that's all we're going to have time for today. I'm Ryan Wall. He's Jordan Pollock. We'll be back the beginning of next week to recap this Texas Tech game before next Tuesday's game again.